That night was nothing like what they said happened later. These words, spoken in a trembling voice by the only living witness to the Acapulco incident, echo like a haunting refrain after 32 years of forced silence. In 1992, Acapulco shimmered as the crown jewel of Mexican tourism, a tropical paradise where Hollywood stars danced beneath the palms and honeymooners strolled along golden beaches at sunset. Luxury hotels vied for the most spectacular views of the bay, and every night thousands of tourists celebrated life in clubs that never seemed to close. But beneath that picture-perfect facade, under the neon lights and international glamour, a darkness festered, one that nobody wanted to see. On July 19, 1992, as the first rays of sun illuminated Revolcadero Beach, a local fisherman found something that would forever change the perception of this paradise. Among the rocks, partially covered by sand brought in by the high tide, was a notebook soaked in blood. Its pages, warped by salt water and stained a deep crimson, contained names, dates, and a hand-drawn map marking a specific point on the coast. That fisherman unknowingly had found the first piece of a puzzle that the authorities would try to hide for the next 3 decades. 32 years have passed since that night, a night when 6 young people vanished and only one returned to tell what truly happened. This is the real story of the sole survivor of the Acapulco incident. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more cases like this, and hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments what country you're watching from. Marina Castellanos was 23 years old when she decided to celebrate her college graduation with her best friends in Acapulco. She was tall, with waist-length brown hair and a contagious laugh that could be heard from across any room. On the afternoon of July 18th, she wore her favorite swimsuit, a turquoise 2-piece she'd bought specifically for this trip, covered by a white sarong with gold embroidery, a gift from her grandmother. The scent of her vanilla and coconut perfume mingled with the sunscreen she religiously applied every 2 hours. Marina had been the best friend of Elena Rodriguez, our survivor, since they were 7 years old. Ever since Marina stood up for Elena against some boys who were teasing her about her thick glasses. Roberto Mendez, 25, was the life of any party. A final-year medical student, he had postponed his hospital internship for this trip, which he had organized himself. That evening, he wore an unbuttoned white linen shirt over his tanned chest, khaki Tommy Hilfiger shorts he'd bought on his last trip to the States, and a pair of leather sandals his girlfriend had given him for his birthday. Around his right wrist was a woven bracelet of red and black thread made by Marina during the bus ride to Acapulco. It was their tradition. Marina made bracelets for everyone on every trip. Roberto always carried a disposable Kodak camera, and that afternoon he had taken what would be the group's final photograph. All of them jumping in unison on the beach, the setting sun behind them, frozen mid-air in a moment of pure bliss. Alejandra Torres, 22, was the artist of the group. A graphic design student, she was never without a sketchbook where she captured moments from their travels. That night she had chosen a coral-colored beach dress that floated in the sea breeze, gladiator sandals that laced up to her knees, and had her hair in a French braid decorated with small white flowers she'd picked from the hotel garden. Her jasmine perfume was subtle but lingering, and Elena remembers that whenever Alejandra hugged her, the scent wrapped around her like a protective cloak. In her raffia beach bag, she carried her usual sketchbook, where she had drawn each of her friends during their 3 days in Acapulco. The last drawing, found weeks later among her belongings in the hotel, showed the silhouette of 6 figures holding hands. Facing the sea under a full moon, the other 2 members of the group were Carlos Herrera, 24, Alejandra's boyfriend since high school, and Luis Dominguez, 23, the group's comedian who always had a funny story to tell. Carlos wore a Doors t-shirt he'd bought at a street market in Coyoacan, and Luis wore his signature Yankees cap, which he never took off, not even to swim. Elena particularly remembers one song they listened to over and over during the trip, Under the Bridge by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Roberto had brought his Walkman and portable speakers, and every afternoon as they watched the sunset from the hotel terrace, that song would play in the background. "It's our song of the summer," Marina had said, never knowing it would be the last song of the last summer they would ever spend together. July 18, 1992, dawned like any other summer day in Acapulco. The forecast promised clear skies and a high of 32 degrees Celsius. At the Hotel Palacio Tropical, where the group was staying, the breakfast buffet began at 7 a.m. Elena recalls waking to the sound of seagulls and the aroma of fresh coffee drifting through the open windows of her third-floor room. She was sharing with Marina and Alejandra, while the boys were in the room next door. At 8:30, the whole group met in the hotel restaurant for breakfast. Marina ordered chilaquiles verdes with an egg, her favorite since they'd arrived. Roberto, true to his future doctor diet, opted for fresh fruit and yogurt. Alejandra sketched on her napkin while waiting for her pancakes, capturing the view of the pool from their table. Carlos read the tourist activities from the hotel brochure aloud, suggesting they go parasailing in the afternoon. Luis, with his typical humor, was doing impressions of the waiter who had served them the night before, drawing laughs that echoed through the dining room. Elena ordered huevos a la mexicana and fresh orange juice, but remembers barely being able to eat half of it. A strange sense of anxiety had washed over her since she woke up. During breakfast, they planned their day. The idea was to spend the morning at the hotel pool, have a seafood lunch at La Cabaña de Caleta, a restaurant the concierge had recommended, and in the afternoon go on that parasailing excursion that Carlos was so excited about. For the evening, Marina had heard from other guests about a beach party organized by locals every Saturday. It wasn't an official party, more of a spontaneous gathering where people brought guitars and drums and lit bonfires. It sounded perfect for their last full night in Acapulco, as they were scheduled to take the bus back to Mexico City on Sunday afternoon. The day unfolded exactly as they had planned. Photos recovered from Roberto's camera show the group laughing in the pool, Marina pushing Luis into the water, Alejandra and Carlos kissing under a palm tree, and Elena flashing a peace sign at the camera, wearing heart-shaped sunglasses. Lunch at La Cabaña was memorable. They ordered a seafood platter to share, which included coconut shrimp, Veracruz-style fish, garlic octopus, and conch ceviche. The waiter, an older man named Don Fernando, who would later be interviewed by the police, would remember them as cheerful, polite young people who left a generous tip. The afternoon parasailing was canceled due to strong winds that suddenly picked up around 4 o'clock. Instead, they decided to walk along the boardwalk, buying souvenirs and taking more photos. Marina bought a shell necklace for her mother. Roberto purchased a bottle of artisanal mezcal. Alejandra found some miniature paintings of the bay that she fell in love with. Carlos bought t-shirts for his younger brothers. Luis invested his money in a sombrero, which he wore for the rest of the afternoon to make tourists laugh. And Elena chose a tooled leather journal where she planned to write about the trip. At 6:30 in the evening, 6:30 p.m. exactly according to the hotel lobby clock captured in a security photo, the group left the Hotel Palacio Tropical. They were dressed in casual beachwear. They carried a small cooler with beers they had bought at the corner store, 2 guitars that Roberto and Carlos had rented from a music shop, and the Walkman with its portable speakers. The evening shift concierge, Joaquin Ramirez, gave them precise directions to Revolcadero Beach, where the gathering was held. Take a taxi to Beto's restaurant. From there, walk north along the beach for about 200 meters. You'll see the bonfires once it gets dark, he told them. The taxi that took them was a white Volkswagen sedan with green stripes, license plate 447 NBL from the state of Guerrero. The driver, later identified as Manuel Gutierrez, would testify that he dropped them off at Beto's restaurant at 7:15 p.m. He watched them walk towards the beach carrying their things. They were singing and laughing, he would recall. He was the last person besides Elena to see them alive. By 8:45 p.m., the group had found the beach gathering. It was exactly as described. About 30 people, mostly young, some locals and some tourists, gathered around 3 large bonfires. Someone was playing La Bamba on a guitar while others danced barefoot in the sand. A group was playing volleyball despite the dim light. Marina immediately joined the dancing, pulling Elena with her. Roberto and Carlos joined the musicians with the rented guitars. Alejandra sat near the fire, sketching the scene. Luis, of course, became the center of attention, telling jokes and juggling 3 empty beer bottles. Elena remembers that moment, 8:45 p.m., with an almost painful clarity. Marina was dancing with a local guy to the rhythm of a cumbia, her hair flying with every spin, her laughter mixing with the music. Roberto was playing Hotel California, see? While a group sang the chorus off-key, Alejandra had convinced a small child to pose for a quick portrait. Carlos brought her a cold beer and kissed her on the forehead. Luis was standing on a wooden crate doing his impromptu stand-up routine about the differences between people from Mexico City and Acapulco. Everything was perfect, too perfect. At 9:20 p.m., everything changed. First, it was the lights. The headlights of several vehicles suddenly appeared from the dirt road that connected the beach to the main highway. It wasn't unusual for more people to arrive, but these vehicles stopped in a semicircle, their high beams blinding everyone. Then came the silence. The music died abruptly, even the waves seemed to fall quiet. Elena remembers seeing Marina turn towards the lights, shielding her eyes with her hand. Roberto slowly set his guitar down in the sand. Then came the shouts, not screams of fear at first, but of confusion. Someone yelled, "What's going on?" Another asked, "Is it the police?" But when figures began to emerge from the vehicles, figures dressed in black, their faces hidden by ski masks, the shouts changed. The first to run was a local who apparently recognized the danger before anyone else. Like dominoes, everyone began to scatter. Elena felt Marina's hand grip hers tightly. "Run!" was all she said. But before they could move, the gunshots started. Not indiscriminate bursts, but precise, methodical shots. People fell to the sand like puppets with their strings cut. Elena saw Roberto try to shield a girl they didn't know, covering her with his body. She saw Carlos pulling Alejandra towards the rocks. She saw Luis, the eternal jokester, with an expression of terror she had never seen on his face. The bloody handprint mentioned in the official reports, the mark that became an iconic image of the case, was left by Marina. As they tried to climb the rocks to escape into the vegetation, a bullet hit her in the side. Her hand, covered in her own blood, pressed against a white boulder as she struggled to stay upright. Elena held her, half carrying, half dragging her towards the bushes. She could hear the screams behind them, the pleas, the shots that continued with a chilling regularity. The official response to the incident began at 11:47 p.m., when the Acapulco Municipal Police received an anonymous call reporting disturbances and possible gunshots in the Playa Revolcadero area. The first patrol car arrived on the scene at 12:15 a.m. on July 19th, nearly 3 hours after the incident began. Officers Jose Maria Hernandez and Pedro Salgado were the first to step onto the beach. finding what they would describe in their initial report as a scene of an apparent confrontation between criminal groups with multiple fatalities. Official report number ACGGMP 1992-789001. Dated July 19, 1992 at 8 o'clock a.m. and signed by Commander Rafael Duran Morelos, presents notable inconsistencies from its very first page. It claims that at approximately 10 o'clock p.m. on July 18th, a shootout occurred between alleged members of organized crime in the area known as Playa Revolcadero, resulting in 6 fatalities and an undetermined number of injured individuals who fled the scene. However, the same document lists only 5 bodies recovered, without explaining the discrepancy. It later states that no eyewitnesses to the event were found. Despite the first officers on the scene reporting they saw multiple people fleeing towards the main highway. The initial official theory was that of a shootout between drug traffickers. The Attorney General of the state of Guerrero, Fernando Montes de Oca, declared in a press conference on the afternoon of July 19th that preliminary evidence suggests the young tourists were collateral victims of a territorial dispute between drug cartels. The first theory hinged on the discovery of several kilograms of cocaine buried near the site. Curiously, however, no firearms were found at the scene, apart from a few 9mm shell casings, a caliber typically used by military or paramilitary forces. The second theory, presented a week later as media pressure mounted, was that of an accidental rockslide followed by mass panic. Attorney General Montes de Oca himself amended his initial statement, suggesting that new evidence indicates it may have been a rockfall that caused panic among those attending an unauthorized gathering on the beach, resulting in a human stampede. This narrative, however, completely disregarded the documented gunshot wounds on the recovered bodies and was swiftly dismissed by independent media, though it remained one of the official versions for years. The initial suspects were 2 men arrested in the early hours of July 20th. Raul Mendoza Flores, a 32-year-old known local drug dealer, and Jesus El Chuy Martinez, 28, both with prior records for minor offenses. They were apprehended in a spectacular raid involving over 50 state police officers. Photographs of their arrest were splashed across every local and national newspaper. Yet both men were quietly released 48 hours later due to a lack of evidence linking them to the events. No press conference was held to announce their release. The most egregious error in the investigation was the tampering with the crime scene. When the forensic team finally arrived at 10 o'clock a.m. on July 19th, more than 10 hours after the incident, they found the scene had been utterly compromised. The bodies had been moved, ostensibly to facilitate identification. The bonfires had been extinguished with sand, destroying potential evidence. Worse still, municipal cleaning crews had been dispatched to tidy up the area before investigators even arrived, on direct orders from the municipal president, who was worried about the impact on tourism. The forensic medical examiner, Dr. Alejandro Ruiz Velasco, documented multiple irregularities in his post-mortem report. The bodies showed gunshot wounds with trajectories suggesting close-range shots and executions, not a firefight. There were ligature marks on the wrists of at least 3 victims. Signs of torture were minimized in the final report, dismissed as injuries consistent with falls on a rocky surface. Years later, in 2010, Dr. Ruiz Velasco would break his silence in an anonymous interview, admitting he had been pressured to alter his findings. The search for the missing was just as flawed. Officially, only 5 fatalities were acknowledged, despite multiple witnesses who fled the scene reporting they had seen more bodies. The families of Marina Castellanos, Carlos Herrera, and Luis Dominguez filed missing persons reports but were told there was no evidence they had been at the scene. It was only when Marina's father, an influential businessman from Mexico City, applied pressure through his political contacts that a formal search was initiated. 3 days after the incident, the physical evidence was handled with a negligence that bordered on criminal. The collected shell casings vanished from the evidence room before they could be analyzed. The victim's clothing was incinerated for sanitary reasons, without any tests for gunpowder residue or DNA. The rented guitars, the cooler, the Walkman, all the group's personal belongings were returned to the families without ever being processed as evidence. The blood-soaked notebook found by the fisherman was never officially logged. Its existence is known only through the fisherman's testimony years later. What do you think really happened that night? Was the truth buried for more than 3 decades? Let me know your theory in the comments, and don't forget to like this if this case is leaving you speechless. Elena Rodriguez vanished from the public eye immediately after the incident. Her family moved her to a private mental health clinic on the outskirts of Cuernavaca, where she remained for 6 months. Doctors diagnosed her with severe post-traumatic stress disorder with dissociative episodes. For the first 3 months, Elena didn't utter a single word. She would sit in the clinic's garden staring into the void, her hands in a constant tremor, unconsciously recreating the motion of holding Marina as she bled out. When she finally began to speak, her words made no sense to those who hadn't been there. She repeated numbers. 6 who arrived, 5 on the sand, 3 who ran, 2 who fell, 1 who hid. The psychiatrists interpreted this as traumatic delirium. They didn't know that Elena was counting over and over what she had seen. 6 armed men getting out of the vehicles, 5 of her friends she saw fall on the sand, 3 who tried to run towards the sea, 2 who were cut down by bullets in the water, and 1 who hid among the dead and survived. The official story solidified throughout 1993. The case was classified as a clash between criminal groups with collateral victims. The families of the deceased and missing received financial compensation from the state government in exchange for signing documents accepting this version and pledging not to make public statements that could harm Acapulco's tourist image. Only the family of Marina Castellanos refused to sign, which resulted in a smear campaign against them, accusing them of seeking publicity and money. The annual memorials began in 1993, organized discreetly by the families. Every July 18th at 9:20 p.m., they would gather at Revolcadero Beach to cast flowers into the sea. The first year, over 100 people attended. By 1995, only the immediate families remained. In 1998, Elena appeared at the memorial for the first time, accompanied by her mother and a nurse. She spoke to no one. She only tossed 6 white roses into the sea, 1 for each lost friend and a single red rose for herself, the one who survived but left a part of her soul on that beach. The false sightings began in 1995. Someone swore they had seen Marina working in a strip club in Tijuana. Another claimed Carlos was living under a false name in Guatemala. Luis was supposedly spotted in a psychiatric hospital in Sonora. Each rumor was pursued by the desperate families who spent fortunes on private detectives that only found dead ends and more pain. Roberto's family hired a former FBI agent who concluded that the youths had been victims of a social cleansing operation aimed at eliminating witnesses to high-level illicit activities. In 2001, an investigative journalist named Andrés Villalobos published a series of articles in Proceso magazine questioning the official story. He had found contradictions in police reports, testimonies from retired officers who spoke of a cover-up, and evidence that an unofficial military operation was active in the area on the night of the incident. 2 weeks after the third article was published, Villalobos was found dead in his apartment. Officially, it was a suicide. His computer and all his files on the case had vanished. The case was officially closed on August 15, 2005. The Guerrero State Attorney General's office issued a brief, 3-paragraph statement declaring that after exhaustive investigations, no new evidence had been found to clarify the events beyond what was already established in the initial reports. The file was sealed for 50 years, citing sensitive information related to national security. The families no longer had access to even the crime scene photographs. In October of 2010, an unsigned letter arrived at the offices of the Reforma newspaper. Typed on an old typewriter, it described in detail a ritual in the sand that had taken place on the night of July 18, 1992. According to the letter, the incident was not a drug-related shootout or an accident, but an initiation ceremony for an elite paramilitary group. The young tourists had been chosen at random as offerings to seal a blood pact. The letter mentioned specific symbols drawn with ash on the rocks, the same symbols Elena had seen but never mentioned because she thought they were part of her traumatic hallucinations. During these years of forced silence, Elena tried to rebuild her life. She moved to Guadalajara, changed her last name, and studied psychology to understand her own trauma. In 2003, she married a gentleman who never asked about the scars on her back or why men screamed in her nightmares. They had 2 children, whom Elena overprotected obsessively, never allowing them to go to parties on the beach. But the silence was consuming her. With each passing year, the truth festered inside her like an infected wound. On November 3, 2022, Diego Santana, a 35-year-old independent journalist specializing in cold cases, was researching a completely different topic in the Acapulco Municipal Archives. He was looking for information on forced disappearances during the 1980s, when an archivist, confused by the dates, mistakenly handed him a box marked, "Restricted 1992, Do Not Catalog." Inside was a copy of the original case file for the Revolcadero Beach incident, but it wasn't the official version that had been made public. It was the preliminary file compiled in the first 72 hours after the event, before the orders for a cover-up came down. The differences were devastating. The original file listed not 6 but 11 confirmed fatalities. It included photographs that had never seen the light of day, images that showed the true brutality of what had happened. The bodies were not scattered randomly as a firefight or stampede would suggest. They were lined up, executed methodically. Some showed clear signs of torture: cigarette burns, precise cuts, fractured fingers. One photograph was particularly disturbing. It showed a victim identified as Roberto Mendez with symbols carved into his chest, symbols that matched exactly those described in the anonymous 2010 letter. The file also included transcripts of the first interviews with witnesses who had managed to escape, testimonies that were never included in the official investigation. A German tourist described seeing the attackers form a circle around a group of victims, forcing them to their knees before executing them one by one. A Mexican couple who had fled into the water recounted how the attackers seemed to be searching for someone specific in the crowd, checking each person's face before deciding their fate. But the most shocking discovery was a typewritten list titled Operation Cleanup, Phase 3. The list contained the names of 23 people slated to be neutralized during the summer of 1992. 6 of those names belonged to the young people in Elena's group. They weren't random victims, they had been specific targets. Next to Marina Castellanos' name was a note, daughter of MC, political leverage. Next to Roberto Mendez's, potential witness Coatzacoalcos case. The others had similar annotations, suggesting each had been marked for a specific reason. Diego Santana photographed every page of the file with his phone before the archivist, realizing his mistake, snatched the box away, panic evident on his face. "This doesn't exist," the man told him. "If you value your life, you'll forget what you saw." But Diego couldn't forget. He spent the next few weeks verifying the document's authenticity, comparing the photos with the official forensic reports and tracking down the witnesses mentioned in the transcripts. One of those witnesses was Elena Rodriguez. Diego found her living under her married name in Guadalajara. At first, Elena flatly refused to speak. 30 years had passed. She had built a new life. She had a family to protect, but Diego had something she had never seen. The real photographs from that night. When he showed her the image of Marina, her Marina lying in the sand with that look of frozen surprise on her face, Elena broke. "She didn't die right away," she whispered. "I held her in my arms for almost an hour while we were hiding. She made me promise I would tell the truth one day. I've lived for 30 years with that broken promise." The publication of Diego Santana's report in January 2023 unleashed a media firestorm. For the first time in 3 decades, the Acapulco incident was front-page news again. Social media exploded with the hashtag #JusticeFor1992. The leaked photographs from the original file went viral before the authorities could censor them. The public pressure was so intense that on February 15, 2023, the Attorney General of the Republic was forced to announce the reopening of the case. The special investigation team was led by prosecutor Maria Elena Vasquez, known for her work on forced disappearance cases. Her first order was to exhume the bodies that had been buried as unidentified in the Acapulco Municipal Cemetery. Advances in DNA technology allowed for the identification of remains corresponding to 3 of the missing persons: Carlos Herrera, Luis Dominguez, and surprisingly a young woman named Patricia Solis, who wasn't even on the official list of victims. Her family had reported her missing that same night, but authorities had insisted there was no connection to the beach incident. The DNA tests revealed something else. Under Roberto Mendez's fingernails, they found skin and blood that did not belong to him. The genetic profile was run through the national database and produced a match. Retired Colonel Humberto Zarate Leal, who in 1992 was a captain in the infantry battalion stationed in Acapulco. Zarate had died in 2015 officially of a heart attack, but his DNA opened a new line of investigation pointing directly to military involvement. Elena Rodriguez's full testimony before the prosecutor's office, given on March 12, 2024, lasted 16 hours, spread over 3 sessions. For the first time, she told everything she had seen and kept silent about for 32 years. The attackers were not disorganized drug traffickers. They moved with military precision, using hand signals to communicate. Maintaining tactical formations as they surrounded their victims, they wore black, unmarked uniforms, but Elena remembered a specific detail. As one of them rolled up his sleeves, she caught a glimpse of a tattoo on his forearm, a skull wearing a green beret. It was the unofficial symbol of a special forces squadron known as the Hunters. Elena described how she and Marina had first managed to hide among the rocks. From their hiding place, they watched as the attackers separated the victims into groups. Some were executed on the spot. Others, including Roberto and Alejandra, were herded toward the vehicles. Marina had been struck by a stray bullet as they tried to move to a better hiding place. Elena dragged her into a small cave formed by the boulders, where Marina's life ebbed away slowly. Elena pressed a hand over her friend's mouth, stifling the moans of pain. Marina died at 10:47 p.m. Elena recalled the time with chilling precision. "I know," she would later testify, because her digital watch stopped the exact moment her heart did. "I stayed with her body until 4 in the morning when I finally dared to move. The attackers had been gone for hours, but I could still hear the moans of the wounded on the beach. I tried to help, But when I approached the first person, I saw it was a trap. He was already dead. They had placed a tape recorder inside his body, playing sounds of agony. I knew then that this was something far worse than a simple execution. This was a hunt. The official statement from the prosecutor's office, released on March 20th, 2024, was carefully worded but devastating in its implications. After reviewing new evidence and testimony, this office has determined that the original version of events was altered to protect local and possibly national interests. There is substantial evidence that the incident of July 18, 1992, was an operation planned and executed by elements with military training, possibly linked to state security structures. The modern investigation also revealed connections to other cases. In November 1991, 8 young people had vanished from a beach party in Ixtapa, just 90 kilometers from Acapulco. In March 1994, 5 university students were found dead under similar circumstances in Puerto Escondido. In both instances, the investigations were quickly shelved, the crime scenes were scrubbed before forensics arrived, and the same ash symbols were found on nearby rocks. Intelligence analysis suggested these incidents were part of the Operation Cleanup mentioned in the document found by Diego Santana. It was a clandestine program designed to eliminate potential witnesses, relatives of political opponents, and anyone who had accidentally stumbled upon covert government operations. Marina Castellanos, for example, was the daughter of a businessman who had refused to cooperate with a money laundering scheme. Roberto Mendez had been a waiter at a restaurant frequented by high-level politicians and might have overheard compromising conversations. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place when Prosecutor Vasquez and her team identified the paramilitary group responsible. The hunters did not officially exist, but multiple sources within the army confirmed their existence as a special operations unit created in the late 1980s. Their official mission was to combat drug trafficking, but in reality they functioned as a cleanup squad, eliminating political threats and inconvenient witnesses. They were under the direct command of General Artemio Huerta Solis, who in 1992 was one of the most powerful men in the national security apparatus. General Huerta had died in 2008, taking many secrets to his grave, but his second-in-command, Colonel Francisco Delgado Ramos, was still alive. At 83 years old, terminally ill with cancer, he decided to talk. In a video statement recorded from his hospital bed on April 5, 2024, Delgado revealed the full truth about Operation Cleanup. "We weren't soldiers protecting Mexico," he confessed, his voice weak but clear. "We were assassins protecting corrupt politicians. The Acapulco incident was ordered from the top. Those kids weren't narcos or dangerous witnesses. They were messages. Every death was a message to someone. Don't mess with us. Don't talk. Don't investigate." Delgado provided names, dates, and operational details. On the night of July 18, 1992, the squadron had received orders to neutralize targets of opportunity at the beach gathering. The original list included only 3 names, but Captain Zarate, a man known for his sadism, had decided to expand the operation. "He liked the blood," Delgado said. "He used to say that the more fear we sowed, the fewer problems we'd have later." The ash symbols were Zarate's signature, a practice he had adopted after training with Guatemalan special forces known for their psychological terror tactics. Elena was called in again for an identification session. They showed her photographs of known members of the hunters. She positively identified 3 of the attackers, including Captain Zarate. But there was one face that disturbed her more than the others. He was a young man, no more than 25 at the time, with cold eyes and a scar on his left cheek. "That's the one," Elena said with absolute certainty. That's who killed Marina. I saw him clearly when he passed by our hiding spot. He was looking for survivors. Marina was still breathing, very faintly. He paused as if he could hear her. I thanked God when he kept walking, but Marina died just minutes later. I think she saw him too, and the terror was too much for her weakened heart. The man with the scar was identified as Lieutenant Raul Medina Cervantes. After the incident, he had risen quickly through the ranks of the Special Forces. By 2024, he was a major general, commanding an entire military region. His arrest on April 15, 2024 was a high-risk operation requiring the direct intervention of the National Guard. He was taken into custody in his office, surrounded by medals and photographs with high-level politicians, including 3 former presidents. Elena's most detailed account of her escape is harrowing. After Marina's death, she remained hidden until the first rays of sun began to light the horizon. The attackers had withdrawn around midnight, but she had heard vehicles coming and going for hours, cleaning the scene. When she finally dared to emerge, she had to walk among the bodies of people she knew, some still warm. She found Roberto with his eyes open, staring at the sky, the symbols on his chest still bleeding. Alejandra was a few meters away, her sketchbook soaked in blood beside her. I wanted to close their eyes, Elena recalled, but I heard engines approaching. I hid in the bushes and saw men in municipal cleaning uniforms arrive. They began to move the bodies, stacking them as if they were trash. One of them complained about the smell. Another made jokes about how much they were being paid for the extra work. It was then I understood this wasn't just a massacre. It was a complete operation, with complicity at every level. Elena walked for miles along the beach until she reached a secondary road. A truck driver picked her up, assuming she was a drunk tourist who had partied all night. He dropped her off at the Acapulco General Hospital, where she was treated for dehydration and shock. By the time the police arrived to question her, Elena had already received a call. A man's voice had said, "We know you survived. We know where your family lives. If you talk, they're next." And so, she lied. She said she had been at the hotel all night, that her friends had gone out without her because she felt sick. The police didn't press her. They seemed relieved not to have a troublesome witness. The ash symbol, the detail connecting all the cases, turned out to be more significant than expected. A forensic anthropologist determined it was a modified version of an Aztec glyph representing Tezcatlipoca, the god of night and conflict. The hunters had adopted it as their brand, leaving it at every scene as a warning. The same symbol was found years later in clandestine graves across Guerrero, Michoacán, and Veracruz, always associated with the disappearances of activists, journalists, and inconvenient witnesses. The detailed timeline Elena provided to the prosecutor's office in March 2024 revealed the attack's meticulous planning. The vehicles had been in position since 7 p.m., awaiting the signal. The attackers had infiltrated 2 men into the party early on to identify and mark targets. At 9 p.m., they cut the cell signal in the area using a military-grade jammer. At 9:15, they blocked the road exits with civilian vehicles to mimic a routine checkpoint. At 9:20, they began the assault with surgical precision. It wasn't chaos, Elena insisted. It was a choreography of death. Each man knew exactly what to do, who to look for, how to move. I saw one of them consulting a list as he checked the faces of the fallen, ticking off names. When they found someone who wasn't on the list, they let them go. Terrified but alive. Those were the ones who would later deny they were ever there, who would say they saw nothing. Terror is a very effective silencer. The arrest of General Raul Medina Cervantes and retired Colonel Luis Pantoja Mendez on April 15, 2024 marked a turning point. For the first time in 32 years, there were individuals with names and faces answering to justice. The images of Marina being handcuffed and led to a Navy helicopter went viral. The man who had built a career on the bodies of innocent young people was finally facing the consequences of his actions. During interrogations, both men initially maintained they had acted under direct orders, invoking due obedience. However, when presented with the collected evidence, including Colonel Delgado's testimony and Elena's positive identification, their defenses began to crumble. Pantoja was the first to break, admitting his participation but insisting that everything had been orchestrated from the highest levels of the federal government. On April 22, 2024, the Secretariat of National Defense issued a historic statement, officially acknowledging the existence of the hunters and their participation in extra-legal operations contrary to human rights and the Mexican Constitution. The communiqué admitted that during the 1980s and 90s, certain elements within the armed forces had operated as death squads, eliminating Mexican citizens under the pretext of national security. Elena Rodriguez published her memoir, It Was Not an Accident, in June 2024. In its pages, she not only recounted the events of that night, but also the 32 years of forced silence, the constant threats, the attempts to buy her silence, and the weight of being the sole voice for her dead friends. The book immediately became a bestseller, but Elena donated all proceeds to a foundation for victims of forced disappearance, named after Marina Castellanos. The book's final entry is especially poignant. Acapulco was never the same for me. Every time I see a postcard of its golden beaches, I see blood on the sand. Every time I hear Under the Bridge, I hear gunshots. Marina made me promise that I would tell our story, that I wouldn't let them turn us into forgotten statistics. It took me 32 years to keep that promise, but finally, Marina, I did it. You can rest now, my friend. You can all rest. The impact of the case transcends the legal realm. It has forced Mexico to confront a dark era of its recent history, when the state used terror as a tool of control. Other similar cases have been reopened. Families who for decades accepted questionable official stories are now demanding answers. The Acapulco incident has become a symbol for a generation of state-sponsored crimes that are finally coming to light. Mexico's most famous tourist destination, the paradise that once glittered in Hollywood films, never fully regained its innocence. Revolcadero Beach is now an unofficial memorial. Every July 18th, hundreds of people gather to remember not only the victims of 1992, but all of Mexico's disappeared. The state government has proposed building an official monument, but the families insist that the best way to honor the dead is to ensure that the truth, all of it, is finally known. If this story has moved you, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on all notifications so you don't miss the next case. Comment below with a case you'd like me to investigate next. Do you know of an unsolved case in your country? Let me know in the comments. Like this video if you want more stories like this, and share it with someone who appreciates well-researched true crime. We'll see you in the next case.